Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Engine Builder Show. Today, our topic will be the secret to making $500,000 with your podcast. If you like the sound of that, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Good morning, everybody.
There was always a ton to learn. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for taking time to tune in. This is episode 108, which is pretty cool. We've been doing the show for, I think we're coming up on it'll be 6 months old here soon. And one of the things that I is having a podcast. And so while this show is only around 6 months old, and we're, like I said, 108 episodes in, which is fun. My other show, Today's Business Leaders, was what I would call my first really successful show. And it's a long form interview podcast where I interview entrepreneurs about their journey, about what they've learned and what they can share with my audience. And I forget how many episodes I have on that show right now, but I think I have 120 or something like around there. They're longer style. I do them a little bit less frequently. Right now I'm doing probably a couple a month. I took a short break last year for a few months, but before that, I was doing them pretty consistently as well. And so the show this fall, I think, will be 4 years old if I remember my years and timeline right. And in the first under 3 years, I had generated $500,000 of revenue from the show, and I did that completely by accident. I started the show originally because I wanted to connect with other entrepreneurs and just build relationships with them and network with them. And I did that because where I live is kind of a little bit out in the middle of nowhere. I'm not in a big city like I used to be when I lived in Chicago. I'm east of Cleveland, Ohio. And in this area, it's not a thriving entrepreneurial community. There are entrepreneurs here, obviously. I think there's entrepreneurs everywhere in the world, but it's not like a Chicago where you can bump into an entrepreneur every 5 minutes. And so I was like, man, I feel like I'm disconnected from my community, and I wanted to just connect with other entrepreneurs and hear their story and get to know them. And so that was the intention with which I created the show. And I think that's important because what I'm going to share with you are 3 things that I've realized that were really critical in making my podcast a success. And when I added up my revenue end of last year, it was over 500,000 that I generated in about 3.5 years was the total time that it took me to get there. So not 500 a year, but pretty substantial. The other thing that, that I've noticed is that that's interesting and people ask me about is I have no advertisers on there. I didn't really go into it with a revenue strategy, but I did, end up generating a lot of money. And so the keys there, in my mind, the first thing is when you're starting a podcast is to play the long game. Don't think that, 3 episodes in, you're going to have generated tons of sales. You're going to, make all this money. What you have to realize is that if you play the long game, then you have the potential to get a lot of success and results from it. And I know I created with my team years ago, we created one of the biggest podcasting distribution and hosting sites on the internet that now gets millions of visitors per year. And what was really interesting is as I was going through that and doing some research, I realized that most podcasts that start do less than 10 episodes. They don't even get past 10 episodes because people start out, try it out, and they just don't persist in delivering content on a consistent basis. And so playing the long game is the first thing you have to do. We talk about that a lot on this show about being consistent. And that's absolutely the key. The second thing that has really helped me be successful with the podcast is, focusing on relationship building. Well, I love this show because it's just a short, 10, 15 minute morning show where I can share some tips and kind of observations and things that I can help you with in this show. If you haven't started a podcast, I'd encourage you to consider doing an interview style podcast. And the reason is because it allows you to have that one-on-one and time with somebody and build a relationship. And if you think back over the last week or maybe last month for yourself in your life and business, when was the last time you had an hour-long focused conversation about somebody's life, their needs, their goals, without interruption, with total focus, no interruptions? I would venture to say that that happens more infrequently, than we'd like, and that's the really interesting and cool dynamic about having a podcast is when you have a guest on, you have their total attention for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or maybe you go an hour, and you get to build that relationship and really get to know them. And it's this interesting dynamic that happens where we can really accelerate our relationship building. And the other thing that I talk about in a podcasting course that I released that really walks through this whole process is you can simulate shared experience when you're on a podcast. And what I mean by that is if you get on a show and you're interviewing somebody or they're interviewing you, and then you retell a story or you tell about your experiences or you go through your history and your story, you're reprocessing that in the moment and you're processing that with that other person there. And so you can then associate with the person that you just told it to. And so that in that moment, your mind, in a sense, because I've observed this with myself and I witnessed it with my guests and I've seen the result of it. Interestingly, when you're retelling that story in that hyper-focused, one-on-one conversation, what happens is you start to associate at some level the person that you're with on the podcast as being there in the moment with you when that situation happened. And so that simulated shared experience is pretty interesting because it bonds you to the other person. And so that second, key is focusing on relationship building. And that's what is going to help you be successful in the long run. I don't know if you guys can hear my dog or not, but he apparently wants to build a relationship with you too. So hopefully that's not too loud. The third thing, and this is really the key that's helped me generate the revenue from it, is after, playing the long game, being intentional about, just being consistent and showing up for the show, focusing on relationship building, and really connecting with my guests. And the third thing is then once I know about my guests and what they offer, who they work with, all those things, is I just follow up with them and either offer to help help them solve their problems or ask them for referrals for other people that I could help. And so about 50% of the revenue from my podcast, Today's Business Leaders, came from referrals where guests I had on said, oh, you should go work with this person, or you should have this person on the show, and those people turned into guests. The other half of it came from after having somebody on the show and having a conversation. I knew their goals, their problems, their challenges. And I was able to say, hey, we have a service that can solve that. We have a product that will solve that for you. And in that case, as always, and like this is something that I want to talk more about on the show, which I will, is remember that your ability to be successful and generate revenue comes down to the excellence of the products and services that you deliver. So make sure that you're really, good at your craft. You're good at what you offer. You're offering excellence in the products and services that you have, because that's going to make everything easier. But with that in mind, and that being the foundation, that you truly have a valuable skill and you have experience and you've invested in that. When you have that, following up with folks and offering your services to them, or following up and saying, hey, can you refer me to somebody else, is a really, really successful, way to move forward. And interestingly enough, I didn't really think about this until now. My first guest that I had on Today's Business Leaders, my friend Lisa Malice, she was really gracious and helped me kind of get the show moving and did a handful of episodes. And since then, she's referred a handful of clients to me that are, have generated over $100,000 of revenue for our business. And even in the beginning, when I wasn't really thinking about that, having that time with her and building that relationship ended up years later, 3-4 years later, still producing referrals and results. And so those are the things that have helped me generate $500,000, if not more. I just realized that those other couple deals that I hadn't added in before with my show. And I would encourage you to think about what it would mean to create a podcast. If you're interested in that and you want to take advantage of the podcasting course that I have, where I teach all of this, I have some really awesome, really great promotions going on for that. So just reach out. You can go to businessmarketingengine.com and you can message me there. You can message me on social here or leave a comment. And I have an amazing deal going on my podcasting course, which I'd be happy to share with you. But regardless, I would encourage you just to be open to creating a podcast, and using it as a way to build relationships and ultimately generate the revenue and results that your business needs. So appreciate you taking time to tune in today, and we will see you on the next show.